everyone, I think, who is interested in this field should know something about Göbekli Tepe. It's the site that was, I mean, it was originally discovered in the 1950s, I think. There were some farmers, or they saw the tops of what it turned out to be these big T-pillars sticking out of the ground on this side of a hill. I think it translates to pot-bellied hill in that language. And they sort of dismissed it as being, they thought, well, no, this is a relatively modern cemetery or something. Like it's not a, it's not, the stonework was too good to be considered very ancient. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s when the German Archaeological Institute and Klaus Schmidt, who sadly has passed away since then, began to excavate at Göbekli Tepe. And that's when they found, okay, yeah, so this is actually tremendously ancient. It does have some very unique stonework, including megalithic work. You've got, T-pillars that are 18 feet tall and 20 plus tons. And it's a very large site. It's all of these stone circles, these pillars that are encompassed by more of a loose or a rough stone walls. And it spreads out. It's quite large. There's a number of them. They've only excavated maybe 10% of that site. And it shook the world up because they based on some of the material that they found in that dig, they pretty much conclusively dated that thing to about 11,000 years old, which is much older than any previously recorded, evidence of civilization or of this type of occupation. So going there was a really interesting experience. People have said for a long time that it was deliberately buried. The work and the research and the science on this is slowly changing. They're starting to move away from this idea that it was deliberately buried. It may just have been layers of sediment that have built up over time. There might have been some periods of burying. In fact, if you tried to bury it deliberately, it would have taken years and years and years. It's a huge site. But what was interesting to me, researching this site, is that if you look at the picture of it, this is a good picture of it. I have some photos too, but this works. Is that you have two styles of architecture here. You have the megalithic work, the T-pillars, and it's not just the pillars here. They would actually cut down to the bedrock. You see that area around the T-pillars. It's when you go there, it looks like cement. It's not cement. It's actually I believe limestone bedrock that they've lapped down to be flat. So you have these huge, big flat areas, and they inset these stones into them, or some of them are set up on pedestals like that central one. And these T-pillars are, a lot of them, they're not all complete. They're some of them are broken. They have the most amazing high relief artwork on them. By that, it means you're carving away the negative space to make the figures and the symbols pop out at you. Like
right.
Yeah, and and that's a good example of that image there of that one stone. Yeah, if you look at that, so you see how the walls around it kind of encompass those stones. Mm-hmm. Like they actually cover up some of the features, and you can clearly tell the walls seem like they've been built to reinforce these stone circles, to sort of preserve them almost. And looking at the walls, and this is also true at another site we'll talk about, Karahan Tepe, inside the walls, there's actually pieces of broken pillars have been used as material in the building of the walls. And the material or the organic matter that they've used to date the site to give it that 11,000-year-old age came from inside these walls. So it's like, to me, I look at that, it's two different architectural styles. I think it is a potentially indicative of two entirely different periods of occupation and building, because these walls are quite primitive. It's local stone, and they're actually using pieces of broken pillars, which means that those pillars could have been there for who knows how long, actually fallen over. Some of them might have broken, and they've been encompassed and used in these walls that were then used to sort of resurrect or renew or renovate the site and protect these pillars. So do we know if it's 11,000 year old? I think that's kind of the earliest date for it. It's the youngest date. It could be vastly older than that. We really don't know.
And you said there's a bunch of this that's still under the ground?
Heaps of it, yeah. So they've kind of excavated on one side of a hill, and that's where the UNESCO, like the World Heritage Site, is now. Mm-hmm. They've put a big cover over the top of it. It's actually great. Like, yeah, see the walkway there? There's this big. They want to keep the rain off it. I think when it does rain, if they left it out in the weather, it'd just get really muddy, and it'd just wash away a lot of the sediment. It's a great way to view the site. It'd be lovely to get down in there, but they get a lot of traffic. Like, this has become a major tourist attraction for that part of Turkey now. A lot of people want to see this, and they've built a big visitor center, and So it's a nice way to view the site. And if you have a camera with a zoom lens, you can kind of see a lot of the detail.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. That negative relief.
Yeah, the high relief. And there's, lots of interesting studies that have been done on Göbekli Tepe. Martin Sweatman, who I've talked about, he was presenting at the Cosmic Summit recently as well. I've talked with him on my channel. He wrote a book called Prehistory Decoded, and he contends that Göbekli Tepe is something of a celestial calendar. He uses a method of statistical analysis that shows that it's extremely likely that's what it is. He's looking at the figures relating to precession and constellations in the sky, and that it when looked at through his analysis, it seems to mark interesting events that we know sort of happened, like periods like the Younger Dryas, because this site dates back to the Younger Dryas. And had there been this comet or these impacts or these fragments of things coming from the sky, that's probably something they would have noticed. He wrote a whole book on this. It's a very interesting theory. He gets attacked pretty hard on the basis of it, I think, from a lot of people that don't really understand the nature of statistics and how that works. He actually wrote there's a peer-reviewed paper that you can read if you're interested in kind of diving into his research or his detail. There's other studies that have been done also that are interesting on the geometry of the site. So there's not only do you have you have these stone circles, which the circles themselves, and this is true also at Karahan Tepe, have interesting alignment. So they align to, a lot of them may well have been used as solar observatories or potentially lunar observatories. So there's alignments on the site that point to significant periods like solstices, equinoxes, lunar events. But there's actually a geometric arrangement between the circles themselves at Göbekli Tepe. So they form like equilateral triangles, I think. There's been some studies done that shows that there was a very deliberate layout planned of how these stone circles were formed. So it was fascinating. And not, so Göbekli Tepe was obviously a highlight, but what I didn't know on this trip was the fact that, okay, I knew about Karahan Tepe, so that's another site that's nearby. It's actually pretty close. There was a site that was very recently discovered. It's an active archaeological site now. I believe the University of Istanbul is excavating there. It's another stone circle site. It's similar architecture to Göbekli Tepe. You have huge T-pillars, but it's something like 10 times larger than Göbekli Tepe. And they've only just sort of scratched the surface at Karahan. They're still digging, and we had special permission to go in there and look around the site. And you can literally look at these beautiful hills with flowers on them, and just poking up everywhere are the tops of T-pillars. You just see this tiny little top of it, and you can clearly see it's a T-pillar, and there's something buried under here. And there might be as many as 1,000 T-pillars on this site. It's at least 5 times or more, I think, larger than Göbekli Tepe, and it's at least 500 years older based on the dating of material that they found so far, which it's kind of funny because when they built a visitor center at Göbekli Tepe, they called it like the 0 point in history. This was the brand name that it gave you. You go in these big light shows and these big wall-to-wall sort of cinematic experiences to look at the site, but it's like, well, I guess that makes Karahan Tepe 0 point minus 500 or something like this.
Wow.
Right? It's even older. And I actually was out there like 3-4 times during the 2 weeks. It's a wonderful site. I could probably even pull up images if we want to see them. But it's, they're just starting to excavate. And you see a similar thing. In fact, at Karahan, there's evidence of domiciles. So one of the controversies about Göbekli Tepe is this civilization, right? Because technically, if you go look at, and I guess this is more along the orthodox line of thinking, the date for civilization hasn't really changed. We're still saying, well, 6,000 years ago, Sumerians and Mesopotamia, that was the start. But when I look at a place like Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe, that screams civilization to me. The theory is, it's purely ceremonial. It was what happened, and this sort of came out with the Michael Shermer, Graham Hancock, and Randall Carlson podcast on JRE. It's a well-known one. I mean, they've essentially just changed the definition of hunter-gatherers to now not just be, well, no, this is we're not just out hunter and gathering, but on the weekends, I guess, when the men want to get away from the women and the kids or something, they like to, participate in a little bit of megalithic stone building and things like this, and, building these 20-ton T-pillars. It's insane. But there's infrastructure on these sites. They're massive. There's cisterns. There's quarries. There are other structures at Karahan Tepe. There's actually evidence for domiciles and permanent housing, which is another indication of sort of settlement and civilization. And I just look at the scale and scope of what is on these sites, and it's like that's not something you do on the side. Like this requires specialization, right? So for people to be able to specialize in doing this type of stonework, this type of a logistical endeavor, the artwork that's required to carve these things, you need to have infrastructure around you. That means there's other people collecting food, there's other people doing things. Like, it's that organization that essentially defines civilization. I think just the scale and scope of the work requires that. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that we don't consider this civilization. And the nail in the coffin for me, and this is something I learned on that trip, is that it's not only is there Karahan and Göbekli Tepe, but there's between 40 and 80 more sites that they've discovered just like that.
Around that area?
Around that area in southeastern Turkey, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other well-known sites, Sogmatar and other places, but these tepes and these T-pillared stone circles, they're doing a lot of ground penetrating radar and that type of thing, and they've discovered somewhere between 40 and 80, and I think they want to open up like 15 of them for tourism. And that's like, at that point, it's a huge civilization. It requires a big population of people, and it's civilization. I mean, it's like a lost chapter of human civilization that we really know nothing about. Like, we've got some artifacts and we've got some indication, but it's to me, it's just a whole lost chapter of our history in this region.